one of the most influential public figures in this country since the Second World War. He's put up with just unbelievable aggression, attacks on him and his family. And the nation needs to be incredibly grateful for what he's helped to achieve with this Leave vote. And that courage was, of course, epitomised when he had a slight argument in an aeroplane about 8 years ago, when he crashed. It's pretty nasty. It would have killed some people, but not our Nigel. Oh no. He dragged himself out, wiped away the blood from his forehead, dusted himself down, looked around the field, put his hand in his pocket, pulled out a fag and promptly lit it. Before we welcome him to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, let's just look at a clip of Nigel in action.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air.
For goodness sake, get rid of not just the worst Prime Minister I've ever seen, but perhaps the most dishonest one as well. I'm going to try and get the people to let their members of Parliament know they will not accept being betrayed. And I tell you what, if I have to do this again, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We had a referendum. We voted for something. Our politicians should deliver this. We have made our minds up in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country. I trust the voice of the people more than the politicians.
Please welcome to the stage, Nigel Farage.
Fantastic. Are you having a good evening? What a great lineup of speakers. Just a couple of disappointments for me. The first is that Rocco Forte got the protesters. They were meant for me, and I'm very, very disappointed. The second is that Tim Martin is doing a pub crawl of 100 pubs around the country, and he hasn't even invited me. I've been jetting around this week back and forth between London and Strasbourg, as you may have heard. So I've spent a couple of days with Monsieur Barnier and Mr. Juncker, who could become your best customer, Tim, I've got to tell you. And of course I've crossed swords with Guy Verhofstadt and many others. But I got to thinking, I've left Strasbourg and I've come back to Westminster. But who really, in this Brexit process, are the enemies? Is it the unelected bureaucrats? Is it the MEPs in Brussels? Is it those that are trying to build a United States of Europe with their own army and an expansive foreign policy? No. Actually, folks, we tonight here in Westminster are in the heart of enemy territory. You see, it couldn't really be clearer, could it? We were given a referendum on whether to remain or leave the European Union. We had the whole establishment. We had George Osborne as Chancellor telling us that 500,000 jobs would be lost. Everybody would, I'll use the word leave London if that's all right with you. And they told us it'd be so bad that when the President of America came, we were going to be at the back of the queue. They virtually told us that plagues of black locusts would descend upon our land, and 17.4 million brave souls stood up, defied them, and voted to take back control of our country. We then faced a general election in which both of the major parties, who took over 80% of the vote, promised us that that referendum result would be implemented. We then moved on to Article 50 being put before the House of Commons, and 498 members of Parliament voting for it. And what it said couldn't be clearer. It said from the date we trigger Article 50, we have up to 2 years to negotiate a withdrawal agreement, or we leave 2 years after we triggered Article 50. It couldn't be clearer. It is written into UK law, and that is exactly what should happen. But I'm afraid the truth of it is that our political class, much of our establishment, and many of the giant multinational businesses never respected that vote from day one. They have done all they can to frustrate it, all they can to delay it. And we get a never-ending series of negative messages. The whole thing is couched continually in economic terms, isn't it? We'll be worse off. We'll be poorer. It'll be a disaster. The very same people who told us we had to join the exchange rate mechanism. Remember that one? It led to, in 1992, a year of record business bankruptcies and house repossessions. But undeterred, the same people told us if we didn't join the euro, the City of London would close down, manufacturing would disappear, it would be a disaster. Thank God we didn't listen to them. Thank God we didn't listen to them. And having been proved wrong again and again, now they tell us that leaving the European Union would be a disaster. Well, can we please go back to first principles? Can we please start to change the debate? The referendum wasn't about whether someone thinks we might be worse off or someone thinks we might be better off. Economic projections are difficult at the best of times. The referendum was about something else. The referendum was about a word that now seems to have evaporated in our whole debate on Brexit. This word that actually is the ultimate prize. This word that our forebears fought and gave so much more for in 2 world wars and more. This word that says we can be a free, independent, democratic, proud, self-governing state that makes its own laws, that controls its own borders, that chooses its friends around the world. And I want us to bring this word, this proud word, back into this whole debate. The word is, and what we voted for was, the independence of this country. That is what we voted for. Independence. And yet, despite the fact we have this piece of law that says we will leave on WTO terms, and sure, no deal, no problem, the difficulty is our political class do not believe in Britain. I want to ask you, do you believe in Britain? Well, I'm pleased to hear it, because we have finished up, I'm afraid, with a failed negotiation, with a withdrawal agreement that in the end looked more like a surrender document of a country that had been beaten at war and quite rightly was voted down by the House of Commons the other evening. But now, in a desperate attempt, the Prime Minister wants to try and get her Brexit in name only through, and she's now engaged on a cross-party debate, attempting to achieve consensus with a group of parties who are all Remainers. The only person that didn't turn up, of course, was Jeremy Corbyn, which is odd. Well, he's perfectly happy to meet Hamas, isn't he? Perfectly happy to meet Hezbollah, happy to take tea with the IRA, but he wouldn't go and meet Mrs May, which I find a little bit strange. They told us when we voted that we were voting for uncertainty. Well, let me tell you what would have happened if we'd voted to remain. Since that date, we have seen the confirmation. Despite 50 years of lies from the British establishment, 50 years of the British establishment telling us that the common market, that the European Union is just about trade, cooperation, and will not affect our sovereignty. I remember very well doing a debate against Nick Clegg. Oh, I'm sorry, Sir Nick Clegg, that's important, that bit. But I remember doing a debate and saying to him one of the reasons I did not want to be in the European Union is because they would build a European army, and I believe that would threaten NATO and our own military abilities. I was told that I was some sort of hysterical crank, lying to the public. Now we have Mr Juncker telling us by 2025 there will be a European army, navy and air force. On the 9th of May this year, Mrs Merkel, the real boss, of course, of Europe, and Monsieur Macron, whose star may have fallen somewhat, but they will be giving a joint press conference announcing further deep, sweeping, and they use the word reforms. What they mean are a further centralisation of power. This European project is about building a unitary state. It is about getting rid of the nation states as effective operating entities. Far from Remain having given us certainty, we would have plunged further into, frankly, regional irrelevance. So let's be clear, Brussels isn't working. And right across Europe, there are people now rising up on the right, the centre and the left saying they wish to govern our own countries. And just as in the past in history, we have often been the nation that has given the example to the rest of Europe, I believe that by delivering Brexit, we will also get rid of this European Union and replace it with a Europe of sovereign nation states working together as friends and trading. Now, I have been, over the course of the last year, I have been perhaps publicly the most pessimistic of all the Brexiteers. And at a previous Leave Means Leave rally, I said things that many in the audience didn't want to hear. My New Year's resolution was that I was going to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And I can tell you, it's the only New Year's resolution I've managed to keep so far in my adult life. The rest all go by the wayside fairly quickly. So we do hope for the best, and we wish those fighting this great battle in Parliament well. But we fear not just the lack of resolve of so many in the cabinet, the Amber Rudds. It's easier than theatre, this, isn't it? The Philip Hammonds. But worst of all, it would appear that previous parliamentary precedent has now been thrown out of the window by a man who puts rude car stickers on saying something about Brexit. That weasel Bercow will do whatever he can to help the law of the land be overturned. I hope they win this great parliamentary battle, but folks, it would be negligent of us in this great campaign, this great cause to take back the independence of our nation, not to recognise that now it is quite possible that we will see an extension of Article 50. And when I've talked in the past about being worried that they may force us into a second referendum, I don't want it any more than you do. But I'm saying to you, we have to face reality in the face. Don't think the other side aren't organised. Don't think the other side aren't prepared. Don't think the other side haven't raised the money, haven't got the teams in place. They have. The Remain campaign are well organised. And one of the failures on our side is, having won this historic victory, we kind of all went back to our day jobs. And I guess it was reasonable to think, wasn't it, with 500 MPs voting for Article 50, that we'd won, that was the end of it. Folks, I don't believe that it is the end of it. And what I am doing here together with Leave Means Leave is building an organisation, building a structure on the ground, rebuilding the People's Army that helped us win that referendum in 2016. They believe. All I can tell you is this: if they extend Article 50 and we're forced to fight the next set of European elections, I will be fighting them. Make no doubt about that. And if worse comes to worst, and they force us into fighting a second referendum, and let's hope and pray that it doesn't happen. It doesn't need to happen. We've had the people's vote already, but let us prepare, let us organise, and I urge all of you to help us in this great campaign. In fact, the better organised they believe we are, the less likely they are to call that second referendum. I hope it's not needed, but I'm pessimistic, and I believe that it may. And I'll tell you, as I said in the video, if I have to fight again against this lot, then believe me, next time, as far as I'm concerned, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. Thank you. I think